So, welcome back everyone to another TFT Masterclass. I'm Upsetmax. Today we are going to be talking about the 5 strongest openers to play on this current patch 14.8. If you're watching this in the VC, in our Training Grounds Discord, feel free to ask any questions, and if they're big questions, then leave them for the end at the Q&A session. Alright, let's get straight into it. So 5 different openers we'll be talking about today. Here they are. So the first one is going to be talking about Umbral Darius, and then Storyweaver Sivir. We'll be talking about the Fortune opener, how to play around it, Senna, Inkshadow, and then last but not least, Faded. So what is the point of today? Well, basically, we are going to be giving a guide about how to play the strongest or even just the most optimal openers on the current patch, and the importance of playing these really good openers is to optimize your mid and late game and set you up for success. So after we talk about all 5, we'll hop into a Q&A, and then we'll end the recording and then go for a Q&A for those who are watching this live in the Discord. If you're in the Discord, please make sure to mute your mic, so then just be sure to mute your mic during the lesson, unless you have a question. Okay, so the first one, Umbral Darius Opener. So this is by far one of the strongest openers on this current patch. Darius just does an insane amount of damage on stage 2. Well, not just in stage 2, but just as a unit in general. He's, I would say, the strongest 1 cost unit. So on stage 2, since most of the time we are playing 1 and 2 cost units, this is going to be a very, very strong unit. So when are we going to be playing this? Well, we want to be itemizing Darius, so this is going to be any melee items that we get dropped early. So this is Bloodthirster, this is Titans, Hodge. We could even itemize them with AP items like Crown Guard, Spark, Merlo as well, and then transition into something else later. That might still be the Heavenly line, we just play around Silas instead. But regardless, Darius uses a ton of different items, and we can be playing this if we have a Kiana or a York drop from our initial orbs. As I mentioned earlier, Darius has an insane amount of DPS. This is why the board is so strong. And although you can't see it in the actual picture, we have our Umbral hexes. So this is like the first variation where it goes into like this type of line. And then the other variation is going more into this type of line. Regardless of how the Umbral positioning, or I guess the Umbral hexes, are laid out for your unique game, you want to make sure that Darius is somewhat protected. So he is on the inside of the front line so he doesn't get hit first, and our tanks York and Malphite are getting hit instead. So if it's on the right side, then York can stay here, then Darius should plop in the middle, Malphite here, and then Kiana in the second row. Sometimes Kiana is able to wrap, especially if it's on the left side all the way over, and then hit to the enemy backline over here, so that is definitely something good as well. Just make sure that your Darius is not getting hit first, because he is our main damage. Make sure to be building some sort of sustain on your Darius early. Once again, this is either like Bloodthirster or Hand of Justice. You can even build Gunblade sometimes, and you have some sort of damage. And this is very tempo comp. You can most of the time, well, actually with this sort of setup, you want to be tempoing into Kayn, Heavenly Kayn on level 8. And you can even carry your Darius up until that point if you have proper setup around him. So that's what the stage 2 looks like, and then we go more into the stage 3 mid-game playing this composition. So just ignore these 2 units first and pretend this is like 2 duelists. I'll talk about this after. So as we are going more into like level 5 and then level 6, we can start adding in more heavenly units. So this is like our Kha'Zix, this is like our Nico, just any strong like good units that fit into this board. So in this case, we just play more heavenly. If we do end up hitting Kiana too, and we want to be continuing our streak, then we could definitely itemize the Kiana 2 over the Darius. So we just like either have like replacement Darius, so that way we can keep the duelist and the Umbral, and then just transfer the items over to Kiana. Kiana is very good units with her recent buffs, and definitely does a lot of damage at 2-star on stage 3. The main point of stage 3 is to try to avoid rolling as much as possible and save as much gold, because we want to be prepping for a level 8, either 4-1 or 4-2, because we are in a 4-cost meta. So basically the first ones to get their 4 costs are in a really good spot, because then everybody else is fighting for the pool that has already been taken from. So try to avoid rolling. This is even though it is a really like quote-unquote weak look, because it's just 1 and 2 cost units, this composition, at least for mid game, is still very strong. You might not 10 streak, but at least you will be killing a good amount of units, or maybe winning half of your fights. And then these units on the right here, so if you do end up hitting like a Volibear or a Yasuo, then you could just tech in 4 duelists instead, and then you just wouldn't play that extra heavily. So either play 4 heavenly or 4 duelists in your mid game, and you are in a good spot to transition into Kayn on level 8. And if you're curious on how to do that, then definitely check out our previous videos of the best compositions to play and check out the Kayn board there. Today we'll just be talking about openers. So stage 2 looks something like this, right? We're level 4, this is very feasible. We might even only have 1 item because normally it's a 3 item component, 3 item opener. So like maybe like a BT and then half a chain, or like a Titans and a cloak, something like this. But regardless of whatever your items are, make sure you have some sort of sustain for your Darius and then some sort of damage item on him. So a really good board, definitely will help you out a lot in stage 2, and you could easily transition into Heavenly Kayn or Heavenly Kayn plus Lee Sin or Kayn plus Silas, depending on your items. Definitely recommend it. Just be sure to hold Darius in your opener or in your stage 1 because this unit is super strong. Alright, so that's the first opener. It's a melee composition centered around Darius. We're going to move on to more of a ranged composition now. So the first one is Storyweaver. Although Storyweaver did get nerfed on the Kale, except for the blue Kale, the AP Kale, it's still a pretty good composition, mainly because we have a Last Whisper holder. A Last Whisper is an insane item. I would say like probably one of the best items on this current patch, just because, well, one, it's just a strong item in general for physical damage comps, and there's a lot of different physical damage compositions that can flex this item. So for example, this is Kayn, this is Ashe, and this is Kaisa. So super strong, and we are able to really flex into whatever we want, or whatever we hit later. And also because we have some sort of Sunder with the Last Whisper, that allows us to take the attack speed Kale. So now we have, and we don't have to take the Shred or Sunder green Kale. That's why this opener is good. Definitely hold onto your Sivers and Garens if you have the spots, and then especially if you already have a Last Whisper available to make. And then for our front line, Rek'Sai pairs very well with Riven for Bruiser, so 2 Bruiser here. And based off of Rek'Sai's kit, because they have kind of an AoE knockup, and then they gain resistances, it's very good to solo frontline her, and then just add a Gargoyles to even enhance her effective HP. And you have a really good strong frontline, and then you have a strong backline. We want to play 2 trick shots to buff up our Sivir, and Teemo is very feasible to play. And if you have an extra rod, then you could just Merle with the Teemo for tempo or save the rod for Rage Blade. The one thing if you make Rage Blade, then you definitely have to go into Ashe instead of Kaisa. So if you don't want to commit that early, or you just don't have the bow, which is very reasonable, because if you are playing this composition and you are win streaking and you already used your first bow for Last Whisper, you will most likely not be getting another bow off of Carousel. So this is a pretty good stage 2 Storyweaver opener, and this is the attack damage version. Just make sure that you have a Last Whisper, you have strong frontline, strong backline, and you're in a pretty good spot from here. So the second option of the same Storyweaver line is to play the AP version, which is much less common, but I would stay still very strong. So this is centering around like a Zyra, Zoe, Riven, and Nico as our early game. So because these are a lot of 2 and 3 cost units, this is more of a rare opener, and you would be playing this if you get an ore drop of these Zyra, Nico, or Zoe units. And the other condition is if we have AP items. So instead of like Last Whisper or like Infinity Edge along these items, we're now looking more of like Shiv, Shojin, Helm, or Rabadons. I know you might not have Rabadons, it's dependent on the region, or even if you get like a Silver Augment that gives you components, but Zyra holds these AP items very well early to mid game. Because of her recent buffs, now her plants will attack, or I guess the missile has a faster travel speed, and her overall DPS has just been increased from that. So very good holder of these items and very good early to mid game carry. We're going to have our Nico holding our frontline items, and then she pairs well Arcanist with our Zoe, and then we have 3 Storyweaver here. One thing to note is with this Kale, we want to be picking the blue Kale, so this is going to give us 20 ability power to our Zyra and our Zoe, which is actually pretty good on stage 2, and then pretty just okay on stage 3 as well. For this composition, we have 2 options that we're going to be transitioning into. So we can no longer play AD compositions, so no Kaisa if we're playing this. We are able to pivot into either Lilia or like Lilia Ashe, and then put our AP items on the Lilia if we do have like that Helm, if we do have like a early Rabadons, or even just like, we wouldn't put the Shiv on Lilia, but Lilia will use Shiv in that composition like very well, because she does magic damage. Or we could go into the AP Sage board, which is basically using this as tempo, going level 8, playing around side Silas too, and we have our 3 Storyweavers set up with like Altruist, Heavenly, we have our Soraka, and we're looking for our Rakan and our Wukong as high rolls, and we just play around that temple board with Silas holding our frontline, not frontline tank items, but like frontline bruiser items. So Silas would hold like our Crown Guard, our Spark, and maybe a blue buff or a Rabadon's in that case. So different options of transitioning from this opener, but this opener is quite good. As you can see, a lot of these openers use gargoyles. So the front to back with the melee front line and the range back line, they use gargoyles very, very well because this essentially guarantees that you will be getting gargoyle value because the enemy will be hitting your frontline first. However, compared to compositions that are more melee centric, where your carries are already in the frontline, gargoyle has a lot less value because it's not just solo frontline anymore. Basically, your entire team is frontline. So keep that in mind. If you're able to make a gargoyle, that makes compositions that are front to back like the Storyweaver a lot more effective. So that's what the early game looks like, and then I just included some versions of the final board here. So we have our Storyweaver, or at least our mid-game board. So this is our AD version, and this is our AP version. So if we're continuing with our AD version, basically we're just trying to play whatever is strongest stage 3 without having to like roll or spend too much money. So we could either play additional Storyweavers. So in this case, we could play either an extra Zoe and a Zyra for 5 Storyweavers. The second blue version of Kale, so I think it's her Scroll of Force, is still very good, still does a lot of damage, and will help us kill units and even win some of our fights mid-game. We're just trying to get to stage 4 so we can transition into either Kaisa or Ashe, and then transition our Sivir items off of her. So just play whatever you have early and mid-game to really strengthen your board while making as much money as possible. So this is an option of the AD version, and then for our AP version, we would just add in Diana and Soraka. Soraka is very good in this comp. It will allow us to get Altruist, pairing Soraka with our Riven, and Heavenly for our Soraka and Nico, giving the whole board HP and giving the whole board AP, which is very good because the entire board does magic damage. So these are just some options of what to play in our mid game based off of our early Storyweaver openers. And I mentioned here, you can do a slight roll. Like I would only roll like once or twice on level 6 or 7 if you're sitting on multiple pairs. So if you really have like 3 important pairs, and important is if your units are holding items, then you can roll a little bit to try to 2-star those units. But if you have some pairs but the units are not holding any items and your units holding items are already 2-starred, then I probably wouldn't roll, and then I just hope to natural them because they are less significant. And you definitely just need to make sure that your units who have items on them are already 2-starred. So this is what the Storyweaver mid-game boards will look like, and then you would transition either into your Kaisa and Ashe, or you transition into like your Lilia Ashe, based off like whatever board you're playing and whatever you hit on stage 4. So this is another strong opener that is currently being played. And then we have everyone's favorite, our Fortune opener. So this is best when we have or I guess only feasible when we have either like a Tristana or a Zoe drop. And then as soon as we have a Tristana or a Zoe drop from our initial orbs on 1-2, then that incentivizes us to hold Teemo and Kobuko a lot more, because the hardest ones to hit is the Zoe and Tristana, but we have our chances to get Teemo and Kobuko just from our natural shops of being level 2 and level 3. So once we hit, let's say we get a Zoe drop, which is great, and then we get a Kobuko in the next shop because we're still level 2, and then we're level 3 on 1-4, and we get a Teemo, then great, we have our 3 out of 3 fortune. Our game plan is to try to 5 loss the early game while trying to save as much HP as possible. So try to snipe off enemy units if possible, scout around. If people have just like a 1-star unit just off on the side, then make sure you same side your units, so then you're able to kill them and save as much HP as possible. Even so, because of the change to player damage, you will be taking less damage on average, because if you lose by 3 units or more, compared to last patch, you are taking less damage on this current patch. So this really helps with Fortune, just taking less damage, and most of the time you will be losing by 3 or more units because you're playing Fortune units and you're not really killing anything. So that really helps out our HP and keeping us healthy. Eventually, we're going to transition into Ashe or Kaisa from our Fortune losses. This is the most common transition. These are just really strong level 8 compositions, and we will be stronger than others who are playing Ashe and Kaisa because we will have extra resources, either in the form of items, in the form of gold, or extra units that we are dropped. So you might be wondering why we have two boards here. This is the standard fortune board if we are trying to be as weak as possible. Basically with our two ranged units, Zoe and Teemo, or Tristana and Teemo, or for some reason if we have Zoe, Tristana, but no Teemo. But we definitely need Kobuko because he is melee. We are able to trap the Kobuko in the corner. So then as we are fighting the enemy, enemy will attack our Zoe and our Teemo first. Kobuko will not be able to do anything. And then once our Zoe and Teemo are dead, then our Kobuko will walk out, be freed from his trap, and then die as well. So this is if we're trying to make our board as weak as possible, which is ideal. Well, not ideal, but in some cases we need to be weaker than our enemies. Well, actually, this is all the case in Fortune. You want to be weaker than your enemies, so then you lose, but not so weak where you just could get complete and try to have at least a couple units where you beat them. But this is going to be your board to be as weak as possible. Now, the other one is if you are playing against another Fortune player who is trapping. So if you kind of envision, I actually could have showed the full board, but imagine, let's say like these are their 3 units, right? And then this is their Kobuko, this is their, actually I'll just use it up here, genius. Kobuko is up here, and then you have like their Zoe, and then you have their Teemo. Right? If we have our Zoe over here as well, and we're also trapping, then both players' units will walk up to each other because this is not within auto attack range. So then they'll have to walk up, and then both Kobukos will be freed, and it's really a 50-50. In this case, we'll be putting Zoe in this hex here. So then, first off, 2 things. Their enemy ranged units will start attacking our Zoe first, which is good because we want to lose, right? And then also, whatever is in their back unit will have to walk up a bit and free their Kobuko. So while we are already getting attacked by 2 ranged units, our units will slowly walk up, especially our Kobuko, and then they will start attacking. But we should already be winning, or we should already be losing, which is winning in our case, because our Zoe is already getting hit twice. So we have our standard Fortune positioning, and then we have our Fortune mirrored positioning if we are facing off against another Fortune player and are trying to lose. So this is what the Fortune is, and then as you get into stage 3 and stage 4, you just want to keep scouting around, seeing what units you can snipe off, start holding your units for either Ashe or Kaisa, depending on your items, and then when you cash out, preferably over 50, because that is where the good caches are, and you could potentially get a Force of Nature or a Tactician's Crown. Then you could pivot off of Fortune, play your strongest board, and then try to go level 9 and win the game. So stage 2 Fortune, very strong, a little bit risky, but will definitely get you ahead of the average tempo of the lobby, and is very good. The next one is going to be the Inkshadow Senna Opener. So this has been around for quite a while. Basically, Inkshadow is really strong early because it gives you a tattoo, which is essentially a free item, which means you're 1 item up on everybody else on stage 2. So items are really strong early game because you're just going to be having more power than your opponents. So looking for 3 Inkshadow, look for either an Aatrox, Shen, or Senna drop from your initial orbs. And then Last Whisper, as I mentioned on the previous couple slides, is just a very good item right now because you are able to tempo into the Ashe, Kaisa, or Kayn line. And in this case, if we're building our frontline items, which we are, because this is a front-to-back comp with our frontline, we won't really be playing Kayn, so we'll be looking to transition into Ashe or Kaisa. Make sure to same side your ghostly units. So like this is split in half, make sure your ghostly units are on the same side so then they can start efficiently spreading their specters to whatever is being hit. So then you're able to efficiently kill this side before they spread on, and at the same time you're hitting the new targets. So that is how you want to be positioning your specter units. It's just a more efficient way to kill the enemy board and will maximize your damage. So this is what the level 4 will look like. Pretty good. We get 3 Inkshadow, 2 ghostly, and 2 sniper. And then as we go more into the mid game, we're basically just playing the level 6 standard Senna ghostly board. We basically have just added our Shen and our Laui. Works out pretty well. We don't have Behemoth, but at least we have Warden, 4 ghostly, 3 Inkshadow. We continue putting our Kaisa or Ashe items on our Senna, and then depending on whatever tattoo we hit, then we can just do like a 3rd Senna item as we start working towards that, or vice versa. It's a pretty good board, and then from here just transition to Kaisa or Ashe on level 8, depending on if you have a Rage Blade or not. If you have a Rage Blade, then you will be going into Ashe or even like a red buff, but if you're just doing full crit like Last Whisper IE, and then like you have like another sword, so you have no bows, then you're most likely going to be going into the Kaisa line. Okay, and the very last one we have is the Ahri faded opener, which is less common, but I think still good and pretty good in some scenarios. So now we're looking for more of a Kindred, Aphelios, and Thresh orb drop. So you see a lot of these openers are based off of what we get from the blue orb on 1-2. Most of the time it will be some sort of units. Sometimes it will just be like 2 gold and a remover, 2 gold and a reforger. But we want to be making our openers based off of what we hit from our initial orb drops on stage 2. So in this case, if it's Kindred, Aphelios, or Thresh, then we could definitely look into the Faded opener. Now, the reason why I like the Ahri Faded opener is because Ahri 2, if you have any items on her, so either like a Shiv, some sort of mana item, even a Morello, you are able to counter Darius. Because Darius, well, being one of the strongest stage 2 openers right now, and being able to counter that is super important. The reason why is Ahri has an insane amount of single target burst damage. Now, even though this is standard Ahri positioning, if you scout around and you see a Darius player, then the Darius wants to be favoring the Umbral hexes, right? So we don't have to keep our Ahri in the corner. We can position our Ahri to be right in front of the Darius. And then if we're hitting the Darius, most of the time we can kill it on the second cast if we have like decent setup and at least like an Ahri 2 with an item because of her insane amount of single target burst damage. And then from here, you can transition either into Faded Reroll or Ash, depending on your items and just your spots. I'll show that on this next slide. So if you can easily get into just a Fearless Reroll and start rerolling on level 7, you just make your Rage Blade and then just play your standard Faded board. Or if you want a tempo instead, then you would just go to level 8, and then once you get to level 8 and can roll down, you just scrap the Fadeds, get the Rage Blade onto Ash with your Wardens, Porcelains, and your Invokers with Lilia, and then you can put whatever mana item you had on Ahri, preferably Adaptive Helm, then you could just put that on Lilia. I don't like making Shojin too much on Ahri, because then you are kind of forced into playing the Faded line, and then you put the Shojin onto Syndra, just because Shojin is not good on Lilia, and then also kills a sword from your melee or from your attack damage carry. So those are your two options. And then eventually, once you hit Syndra, just move your Ahri item onto your Syndra and you are good to go. So I think those are all the openers from today. So I'll just quickly recap all of them. So the first one is going to be, I'll just go over here. The first one is the Umbral Darius board. Umbral, very good trait early. Just giving a flat shield on everyone early game is really good. It's a lot of extra effective HP, and Darius being the best one cost unit in terms of damage output. Just put any melee items on him, transition into Kane. Storyweaver Sivir or Storyweaver Zyra, just depending on whether you have AD or AP items, and then you can transition into Kai'Sa or Ashe, or into like some sort of Lilia AP Sage board. Lilia or AP Sage board. Fortune opener, love to see it. We start getting our luck up as soon as possible, and then transition into like Kai'Sa or Ashe. Same thing with our Senna Inkshadow, and then Faded, you're either going into Faded Reroll or going into Ashe. So that has been everything for the 5 best openers on the current patch. I'll now end the stream,